Okay, welcome everyone to Sylvia's Press, a weekly Muse Zoom poetry series. And we are thrilled tonight because we have a special friend of Two Sylvias and someone who's been my friend. I was thinking back, we were early bloggers back in the day. We've got Poet Mom in the house.
The good old days.
The good old days back when we were bloggers. That's where I met January Gill O'Neil, and she's the author of her first book was Underlife, Misery Islands, Rewilding. But we've got to bring this beauty out. Glitter
Ooh,
Road, which
yay.
is out, and I'm going to drop January's bio. And I mean, look at the gold there. I'm going to drop
Yay.
January's bio and a link so you can get this. And I have said this to Jan, which is if this book does not win an award, I'm going to lose my marbles. Because
Hmm.
this is the most, I think it's your best book to date. It's so powerful, so beautiful. I read it. I was one of the early readers and read it in one sitting and could not put it down.
Oh,
So
thank you.
we are thrilled to have January here talking about revision. And I'm going to pass it on over to Jan and we're off.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Annette. Hello, everyone. I hope you're ready to revise. It's good to be here. I haven't I think done one of these for Two Sylvias in a little bit, so it's good to be in front of all of you, and couldn't think of a better way to spend a Tuesday night. So I'm gonna talk for a little bit, and then I will put up some slides and go a little more in depth into my process for revision, and we'll do a writing prompt and take a break at that time. So we'll probably push those two things together, and then I'll come back and maybe hear from you about your process, your thoughts about revision, and then I'll leave time for a Q&A, which will probably in the last half an hour, last 20 minutes maybe. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to catch them. Sometimes I miss them if I'm talking and then they just pop in. So I'll try to do a better job of checking. So I'll talk a little bit about me and go from there. I am here in Beverly, Massachusetts. So if you feel like it, if you could put where you're from in the chat, I imagine there are a lot of West Coast folks, but I don't actually know. So we've had a lovely day. I hear that it snowed down in Seattle. Does that sound right? Yeah, no, it's like 50 here, which is awesome for us. So let's see. So as Kelly mentioned, my fourth book just came out, and I think about the poems that are in there, and the hard work of wrangling them and making them sound cohesive and working together. It is so hard to do. Um, it's also the craft part of it. It's the part that makes so much sense. I mean, we need to do it. It's the other half of the writing part. And I'll tell you straight up, I do not like revision, but it is a necessary evil. So, but I have to say, I've found some of my deepest, moments going back and looking at what I've written and then reaching in deeper and trying to pull meaning out and, constantly questioning, what am I risking in this poem? I've certainly written enough poems that, just didn't make it over the finish line. They didn't thrill me. I didn't learn anything new, but giving things a second look, a third look, makes a difference in the type of writing that you produce. So, um, what can I tell you to start off with? I'm a single mom. My kids are off to college now. But I got started, as Kelly mentioned, online. And back in the days when the internet was nicer, we were bloggers and we were I mean, Kelly, I mean, you remember that time, right? Let's go look at this person's blog and somebody else has the link. It was just sort of a nicer time online, but a lot of what we did was go check out other people's work and encourage them, and we work on revisions. People would have suggestions and we'd take them or not take them. And it's almost an art form in itself. So I want to go ahead and walk you through my process a little bit. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. One thing I would love for you all to think about as we are moving through tonight is think about maybe set an intention. You know, my workshop, will sort of encourage and maybe give you a few tools that you might not have already to work on revision, whether you do a prompt and try to revise here, or whether you take it and do it a day or two later. But I have to say, I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. And so I want you to think about what you would like for your work, what you would like maybe simply for revision. But I think you have to be intentional about whatever it is. So as we're moving through the evening, set an intention for yourself. So when you're done with this, maybe you'll go and revise the 3 poems that you wrote last week, or maybe you'll connect with a friend and do a workshop, or maybe it's just you'll sit down and start writing. So whatever it is, think about an intention and put that out into the world. Okay. Okay. So I like to start out by framing this line by line type of editing. I often wonder if a poem is actually done and when is it ever done. I like to tell the story that in 2022, when the National Book Awards were, it was National Book Award week, and there were 5 nominees, and Sharon Olds was one of them. And the night before the big event, because the nominees don't know who wins, of course, until the very night. The night before, they read at NYU. And Sharon Olds got up and read a poem that she had edited that day. It was in her collection. It was in ballads. And, if you go watch the video for it, she had line edits in it. And she went ahead and read that poem, which just makes me think that revision is never really done. So don't think at any point that you can't go back to your older work and take a second look and a fresh eye to it. So I ask, is a poem ever really finished? I believe a poem is done when the poem has asked all that it can of me. And that in the process, I feel transformed in some slight way. But until that point, revision is a slog and it is a process. And so we don't want to cheat ourselves out of the full range of what we need to do to work in service of the poem. So I'm going to start with my slides. And I have to tell you, I revised them today, and I am not that creative when it comes to this stuff. So bear with me, and hopefully there are no typos in there. And I have 100 slides, so I hope everybody's ready. So sit down and strap in. Here we go. Okay, I actually have like 7 slides. All right. And so again, I am not good at this. And I'm trying to get my screen to go full screen. Yeah. All right, one moment, please.
I think I see
Here
it,
it is.
Jan, right under where
Where?
it says fit to window. Is that it or no?
At the top? No, see, it's at the bottom, and then the Zoom bar is in my way. So I'm wondering. I don't know. See, this is why I don't use slides often. Let's see. All right, this could work. Can you all see that? I hope.
Yes, that looks great.
All right. All right. Here we go. All right. So I love this little quote by Bob Hickok. I use it often. A poem should actually make you moving things around my screen, sorry. A poem should actually make you a larger person, and that you see your mind reflected back, and you're able to have a conversation with yourself in a way that you wouldn't probably if you were just walking around the house. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I think we're all here because poems expand our worldview, and the nitty gritty of revision is really where we do the hard work. We sit, we revise, we think about how we want to reflect this moment, and I think that's wholeheartedly important. And it's more than just regular conversation. It's more than just it's just more than our day to day. Okay, so now the key is, how do I get the slides to move? Okay, here we go. So this is a list, and I'm just going to run through the list with my notes here. So I'll be looking down occasionally, but um, so do I use these steps all the time, every time? No, but I think some combination of this I do, and so I encourage it. Joy has always been a part of my DNA. The quote that I have in my book that leads off says that joy is an act of resistance, and that's a quote from Toy Derricott. And so I always start in gratitude. It is pokey, and I don't know, in this day and age, maybe it's a little suspect, but um, I come to the page thankful that whatever I have written, whatever I have worked through, is there in front of me, and I am making it to the other side. And so, thank goodness I've worked through this moment that's in my poem. And we've all been through some difficult stuff. So the fact that we can get it down on the page resonates, and there's an energy there. And so I am thankful that I have this moment. What a gift that I've lived through this moment and I'm able to write about it. So, on one level or another, I begin in gratitude. And so, of course, I want to read the poem aloud. In my early career, I'm surprised how many times I didn't do that. That I didn't allow for my voice to work more in tangent with the poem. But if you don't do this practice, I highly recommend it. Read your poem aloud. Your ear is your first best editor. Let the sound and the cadence guide you. If accessibility is an issue, there are all sorts of software programs that will read your poems back to you, which is interesting in itself. But you can always record your voice. You can record your you can do a little video. Nobody has to see it, but it's interesting to have your work read back to you. And I think it's a great way to listen for your trouble spots. If you're being truly honest with yourselves, those places that you fumble, you skip over, you pause, those are the places that you might want to spend a little more attention with. And so, number 3, form follows function. How does the poem look on the page? Does the structure inform the meaning? If not, try changing the format and playing with the stanzas and the lines. So I've often done this. I don't know if I'll break it out tonight, but I will. I often start out writing a poem. It looks like a little bitty cluster or a box or sometimes a column. And as I'm revising, I will work with couplets. I will work with 3-line stanzas, 4-line stanzas. If it's sometimes I change it into a prose poem. And when you go from one format to another, it usually reveals something about the work that you didn't already know. And I especially like turning anything into a prose poem. It doesn't mean it stays like that, but prose poetry doesn't allow for, you know, what happens on the right margins. I mean, you sort of have to let go of all your tricks, your rhymes, your your pacing of the line, syllabics to a certain extent, just to make the poem work. So I think prose poetry is a great way to actually take a look and see if the poem stands on its own without all the things you do in a poem with stanzas. And so those are the three basics to start. Now, this is where you're really starting to revise. So, step four, you're looking for places where your poems drag. Is there a tension in the line? Does enjambment affect the look and feel of the page? So, what I often tell people is that if you've got sections that are flat, that are not working, take a look at your verbs. Try to use stronger verbs, action verbs. So, if you are hooking your lines together with am, is, are, was, were, be, been, get your verbs up and running. It's much more interesting to say, Jan, rather than saying, Jan is going down the street, to Jan runs down the street, drives down the street, you know, cries down the street. I mean, there's a whole world in the verbs. So take a look at your verbs. Um, so sometimes when we get to revision ends up suggestions you might get might be take this out. I used to think that revision was much about cutting, but I don't know if I believe that anymore. In my younger days, I might take out, whole lines or sections. And I'm not opposed to that. Sometimes your favorite line is the thing that's holding the piece back. But now I'm more uh, apt to see what I can make work. And so, yes, it's always an option to take things out, but it might be more interesting to see if you can make things work with a few simple edits. So, you know, again, you won't know that until you get into the work. But revision does not necessarily mean cutting, but it might mean taking a second look and being willing to try something. And if it doesn't work, try something else. So, um, number 5, revise for logic, looks, and lyric. So, this is the nuts and bolts formula of your poem. Does your poem make sense? I mean, sometimes we allow for maybe language that lifts off the page, but does it make sense for the rest of the poem? And so I'm always looking for those logical twists those leaps that just don't make sense, even though they sound pretty good. So then it becomes a balance of, what's more important for the poem? Does the logic have to work, or can we take a leap of faith and just let it go? Um, I've talked about the look of a poem on a page, but I also think, you want to, when you first evaluate a poem, you're looking at how it appears on the page. But you also want to see if, what the ideas of absence and presence are looking like on your page. And so that white space is just as important as the words that you've typed. And so when you're looking at the poem, you want to look at the whole thing. So sure, is it spaced in a certain way? Um, is it flush with the left margin, or do you want to like expand it? I mean, is it tight like a knot because that's what the sensations are from this poem, or can you expand and let it be more free flowing? So you want to look and see how, the space, how you react to the space on the page, and how the energy shifts when you keep it solid or break it apart. How does it look on the page? And towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about manuscript revision. But, if you're working on a series of poems, does this fit into your series just based on looks? Or if you're looking at your poems as a whole, does it stick out? Is that a good thing? Do you want to see a lot of variety among the work that you put together? Or is it uniform? I'm thinking of uh, Victoria Chang's Obit, and how all of her poems looked like coffins. They all looked like, columns. But then she got to points where she did tankas, and then she did a longer poem in the middle. So you really do want to look and see how the space is affecting the poem itself. And so logic, looks, and lyric. Are you seeing any patterns in your work that might be taking away from the overall meaning of the poem? Um, are there distractions in the poem? Does the poem, are you using words over and over again that you would, that people will notice? Is it adding to your poem? Is it helping with the flow of the poem? Um, are there any themes emerging, whether it's within the poem or within a series of poems that you're working on? So as you are looking and seeing how everything is shaping up, you're thinking about, does it make sense? How does it look? And what is that meaning behind the poem? Is there a theme? Is there a poem hiding under this poem? Okay, so number 6, how will it end? This is one of my favorite questions. I mean, sometimes we haven't decided how our poems are going to end. Sometimes they start out with a lot of sound and fury, and then they get to the end, and then they signify nothing. Meaning that you put all this effort in the beginning of the poem, and then you get to the end, and it just doesn't seem to hold up. And so I think that whatever your poem is, it has to work itself to, the rightful conclusion. Does it earn its ending? Sometimes if the endings are weak, it comes down to, what are you risking in this poem? And I think that's something that everybody should ask in their poems, especially the ones where you're like, "Ah, I'm not sure about this one." What are you risking in this poem? What did you know by the end of the poem that you didn't know when you started? And I think all poems have to have some kind of a shift, some kind of a change or a transformation. It can be very slight, but I think in order for it to move beyond description, there has to be there has to be a change. I mean, if it were a sonnet, we'd call it a volta or a turn, but it has to build to something, and it has to come to some sort of a resolution that you have worked through all the way to the end of the poem. I'm wondering, I hope that makes sense. As I was explaining, I'm like, does that make sense? Here's another way to look at it. Are you in your poems, do you tend to go for like the quiet endings, or do you go for something that's a little more, a statement filled ending? Is because the ending can be, the distraction for the whole poem. And so I take a look at how your poems end. And often I feel like we haven't decided, maybe because we haven't separated ourselves from the meaning of the poem. Maybe we are too close to whatever we're writing about. And so it's a good reminder that we are working in service of the poem. Okay. So I play with, where this should come in my talk. And so you've written your poem, or you looked at the ending, and now midway through, and now you're going to take a look at the title. I always think about the title as the unofficial first line of the poem. And so if you have a good title, and it's working in conjunction with your first line, everything under that you need to prove. So you've got a good title, and sometimes the title and the first line are reflective of one or the other. But if you've got like a great title, great first line, um, your job is to sort of prove everything that comes after those 2 points in the poem. So yeah, and I'll pull out some poems, and I'll show you examples of like good titles and how that works. Especially the titles and first lines that are more statements, and then you have to prove it. And so you want to make sure that the poem is living up to the expectation that you put forth. Let's see, what else can I say about title? Because I actually have quite a bit to say about titles. A good poem title creates a vista for your work. It can make the reader curious. It leads into the poem. It provides setting. It makes the reader think twice, and it offers context. And so, even if it's a place name, that's something that you don't have to mention in the poem. If it's I don't know, you know, Miami Beach 2020. That's information that you don't have to say in the poem. And, these days it seems to be a bit of a trend where titles seem to be very long or, they are evocative or they lead with a central archetypal image. So I'm thinking of Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm in Pine Island, Minnesota by James Wright, which is not a current poem. But I also think of poems with shock value like Beth Ann Finley's poem, What I Think About When Someone Uses Pussy as a Synonym for Weak. Or then this really long one by Ross Gay. Within 2 weeks, the African American poet Ross Gay is mistaken for both the African American poet Terrence Hayes and the African American poet Kyle Dargan, not one of whom looks anything like the others. I love that. That's just a ridiculously long title. And so when you set up that expectation, then the poem has to work with that title. And actually those poems actually do work really well. So pay attention to titles. I think titles sometimes are lost opportunities. All right. So we're at 8. Note patterns and distractions. So you want to look for any unnecessary repetition, maybe too many adjectives. I tend to use the word dark a lot in my poems, so I'm attuned to that. I'm like, there are other synonyms for dark. Um, let's see. You want to make sure each word in each line is working as hard as you are in putting this poem together. So when you are looking for patterns and distractions, you're really looking for your bad habits, your crutches, the things that you have done in other poems that you know will work in this poem. I mean, you're looking for things to revise and make fresh and new. So you want to pay attention to those things where if the reader sees it, they may question it. They may wonder more about it. I also think this is true of our, sometimes we put references in poems and there's a fine line between, putting in an image that the reader may not know. I think the reader has an obligation to look things up, but if it becomes too much of a distraction, then it pulls the reader right out of the poem. So you want to pay attention to your patterns and your distractions. Okay, number 9. Who's your audience? I forgot to put a question mark there. Who's your audience? Who are you revising for? Not all of our poems need to see the light of day. Sometimes we should write poems just to write, and we write them for ourselves. So moving beyond I'm writing for myself, who is your audience? If your poems are ready for publication, then of course you're writing to a broader audience. Sometimes though we do these passion projects that are for smaller groups, smaller audiences, family members. So I think it's important to recognize who the audience is and to read the poem from the perspective of the person who may be reading this poem. And that's an interesting thing to do if you haven't done it. If you've actually sat and thought about, pretend that you were the reader and see if you get everything that you're trying to explain. I often have my students do that, and it's amazing what they tend to miss by doing this simple thing is just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And that's really sort of a follow-up to the idea of distractions and putting in imagery and illusions that your reader may not get. If I'm writing a poem about the Boston Red Sox and you're in Seattle, you might not know all the lore that's related to Boston. So, I mean, that's something to think about when you're putting together these poems for a broader, international audience at this point. Okay, so we've done all of these steps. We've had our time with them. I encourage you to read again, read your poem aloud again, and this time with feeling. And read it as if you were getting up and performing it, and get to know the cadence and the sound and your breath in the line. Listen to the places that you relax and that you flow and that you push your words together and then you break them apart. and see if you're comfortable with it. And it may take a few times, doing this over and over again just to make sure you're in a good space with it. All right. And then my last point on this slide, and then I will stop for questions and comments. Give it time. Unless you are under some sort of a deadline, the poem may not be working for you right now. So get up, stretch, go get some water, call somebody, go, you know, put the dishes in the dishwasher and let them go and come back, or put it away for a few days. I mean, many of us have lots of projects that we work on. So it might be nice to shuffle through something else, go read a book, come back, give it a second look, and see if you can bring something new to the page. Often, walking is a good stress reliever, but I'm always writing when I'm away from the page. So getting out there and listening to city sounds and walking with the dog and, being in tune with the weather. I mean, sometimes it just opens a space for you to make a change, that you may not see coming. But give it time. I think sometimes when we're putting ourselves under so much pressure, I don't think the words come. So I think we just need to be open to possibilities. Okay. Now I will at the end, I have all that in a handout that I can pass along to you. But I wanted to check in with everybody to see if there were any questions that came up as I was talking, and if there are strategies for others. So if you want to ask a question, I guess maybe use you can either like use one of the emojis or throw it into the chat. Any questions or comments? I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. Okay. I mean, I really do to some extent go to the page and sort of operate in that way, but I don't necessarily go, with the best mindset. Like, just because I do that stuff doesn't mean I get good revisions all the time. So, but it is helpful to look at a few things. Okay. Do you have a book on revision? No, but there is a great book on revision, or other parts of it, called Demystifying the Manuscript, which does, I think, talk about revision, certainly of a manuscript as a whole. So, not ruling this one out. I don't actually, that's a good thing. I don't know if there is a good book besides that one on revision. So, if people know, I mean, revision of individual poems, no, I don't think there. Well, there might be. I just don't know what it is. But certainly of manuscripts, that one's a good one. Um, let's see. How does this work for a long arm poem? I'm not sure what you mean by long arm for long arm poems. So I'm a little unclear about that.
I can tell you what that is. That's an Ellen Bass term. So a long
Okay.
arm is when you start writing, and then like long arms, you start bringing in this. So it's a poem
Oh
that
yeah.
goes all over the
Oh,
place. So it might have like garbage or a shed or a meteor, or so
right.
that's kind of a long arm
Oh, I
poem.
love that.
We've been doing prompts on them.
Oh, that's cool. I don't call them that, but I feel like my more recent poems are like that. I call them kitchen sink poems. Those are poems where you just, because I'm a person who likes complications. And so the craft for me is trying to make a bunch of stuff that shouldn't work. And I've got a few of those in the new book. And honestly, it's kind of influenced by Diane Seuss and the American Sonnets. So when I was looking at her work, and I was looking at Terrence Hayes's work with American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassins. I mean, um, I think the process honestly is the same. I think you go through, and I think it's intuitive about what works and what doesn't. It's also helpful to work with another person or a group and get honest feedback about what works and what doesn't. Even the places where your friends look at your work and they question certain things, I think you have to pay attention to that. Whether or not you honor, those changes and revisions that they give you, that's a different story. But I love poems with complications. And not all of them work, but most of my poems like that work. They do because I don't give up on them. Let's see. If you like your ending, but but feel you haven't earned your way to it, what do you do? Good question. Let's see. You might try this. You might try to write the poem again without looking at the poem and see how much of it you remember. And if the ending is really the only thing you remember or it's spotty in between, then maybe those are the sections that you work on. Maybe it's the rest of the poem that needs a revision. So that's one way to go about it. I've got some exercises that may help with that. Let's see. The idea of how will it end? Yeah. I start with the title. It does change. Yeah, I mean, I often start my poems with the title. And they often change, but sometimes they don't. And really, the only time I change them is when they really don't fit with the poem, you know. And then I might pull something out of the poem. I have written poems that have started out poem, and then by the time I have to move them along, I come up with something else. Mm, let's see. So Kelly says, you mentioned you have a habit, you have a habit with dark. Do you now purposely change that word or view it like a touchstone, such as how Susan Rich claimed the word blue? Yeah, I mean, sometimes I was doing, those word clouds that you can put your poem in and show up. For a batch of poems, I've done that before. And I put them, online into a word cloud and see which words come up often. Certainly, I did that with Glitter Road, and the word rebel came up quite a bit, but that made sense. I mean, I had a poem called Rebel Rebel, and it was a hustle. So I still use the word dark, but now I'm sensitive to it. So you know, I think about midnight. I think about other ways to describe it, which I like that too, because it sort of changes the mindset about what the line should be. So maybe dark is not the right word. Maybe I have to change the whole relationship to, figure out a better way to keep this sentiment in the poem. But it doesn't have to be described as dark. Let's see. I like Ordinary Genius by Kim Adenizio. Yeah, that's a good one. I have it on my shelf. Um, let's see. So Julia says, make the lines of the poem work for you and you have your first and last line statements. Resonates with me and my the way I write my poems. Yep. That definitely, I think everybody's got their own techniques that work. So yeah. I yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Mary Oliver talks a bit about revision in the poetry handbook. Okay. This is all good. The Art of Revising Poetry by these are good. Yeah, Charles Finn and Kim Stafford. I don't know those. Okay. I find revision a great way to reactivate my brain when I'm stuck starting something new. Gets my brain working. I love that you made the clarification that editing and revising doesn't necessarily mean cutting. Absolutely. Okay. I find that many of my rhyming poems, Lisa says, the last line doesn't. Um, I am not one to rhyme. I will straight up admit that. Are you, one thing I think will work, you might be doing this anyway, is if you don't try to rhyme noun to noun, if you can change up the part of speech so that noun to verb or noun to adjective or some other combination may be interesting. So, um, my students tend to like the rhyming dictionary. So there's that too. Okay. Thank you for the links. Okay. So I'm going to try to bring up my slideshow again. Any final thoughts or questions? Okay. Let's see. Ugh, slideshow issues. Okay. Here we go again. Okay. All right, so some practical things that you can do. I mean, I've sort of talked about, just steps, but now these are things that you can actually do. And again, I just created these slides today, so it's not my best work as I'm looking at them now. So um, what you can do is you can use a highlighter or a pen. And I like working with paper. Not everybody does, but I like printing. I like circling. I'll work online, and these basic things you can do in a pinch, in online. So I tend to use a highlighter, and I will mark places in the draft that are most exciting, like the things that well, again, energy is a big part of like my writing process. So where is the heat? Where am I excited about? Um, what's most exciting to me? What's least exciting to me? I also mark, maybe with a different color, but I note like this is working, this is great, this is my trouble spots. But pay attention also to what isn't marked. So we're looking at what works, we're looking at what doesn't work for you, and then we're paying attention to that space that's sort of uh, liminal to a certain degree. It's the stuff that we haven't marked, right? And I'm big about absence and presence, and what's here and what's not, and sort of and the worlds that they create. So pay attention to all those areas. Um, I think it's important to highlight, um, and pay attention to the places that you're really most interested in. So if you are having trouble, say you've got this revision that's like, oh, I've been fooling around with this for a while. No one says you have to start from the top. Start in the place that's most interesting to you. And whether that's the place you like and you're like, okay, this is great, or it's like, well, this is the trouble spot. Wherever your gut, whatever that interior, that feeling that's telling you, okay, start with that. Lean in with your body. What is your body and your breath telling you to work on first, right? And listen to that voice that says maybe this section doesn't work. I mean, we want to make things work, but sometimes reality is that's the one place you want to work is the thing that is holding back the entire poem. And so you want to try to write the poem without that piece. See what happens. I mean, maybe it is taking the piece that is not working in the poem and giving it its own space somewhere else. Okay. So my second point, this is sort of a good. I have longer prompts, but these are sort of quick hits. This is actually really good if you think you might have a series hiding in the one poem that you've written. So you have your poem that you're revising, but it is troublesome and you're not sure if you're hitting the right mark. What if you write about the day before this moment, or the morning before this moment happened? So let's say you're writing about the moment you got engaged, right? What if you wrote about what happened the day before, the morning of, or what happened if you're writing after that time, the next day when things are calm and there's a little more reflection? And so if you write about you know another moment, it might bring you closer to what you think you are trying to say. Here's another way of looking at that. Um, have you ever worked with somebody and they've written this poem, and then you ask them to tell you what the poem is about, and what they tell you is not in the poem? And it's usually because the poem is in our heads and we think everybody is on the same page and they're not. And so I think this exercise about the day before and day after gets to that. I mean, and if the exercise itself doesn't work for you, have a conversation with somebody, explain what the poem is about, an honest broker of your work, and see what they reflect back to you. Mhm. Okay, the third one is write a mirror poem, and we're going to do that as an exercise. And then the fourth idea I have is to write the opposite. So if you're writing about, um, a sad time in your life, then maybe thinking about a happier time. There's something between the two that you may be able to pull lines out of one to help the other, or you may have two poems that are, again, reflecting each other. Maybe you get two different works out of it. Okay, so these are the quick tips that I often get. Like, if you're not going to do the whole editing process, do these things. Read your poem aloud. Always, always, always. You can retype or rewrite your poem to see what you remember, see what the more interesting parts are. When we handwrite something and then we type it up, I mean, those are two different ways of looking at your work. Um, Change your line breaks and stanzas if you are absolutely stuck. And it's amazing, you know, uh, putting in a break and seeing how that reshapes the poem. Maybe it gives it a little more energy, helps with the flow. And certainly, if it's not working as in stanzas, then maybe changing it to a prose poem, maybe changing it to a column, or breaking it apart. Try something different. Keep your original, of course, but try something different. You might consider changing the perspective of the speaker in the poem, so that if it's a first person perspective, maybe trying something in third person might help. I This is just sort of a good editing thing to do. Read your poem from the bottom up, backwards, and usually seeing words out of place. I mean, I tend to skip like prepositions, so I always have a word missing here or there. So that's one good way to catch those small little typos and edits. And the last 2 points on these things almost contradict each other. Don't let yourself off easy. Sometimes we say, "Okay, this is good enough. All right, it's fine. It works. It's a weak line in a strong poem." If you can make that, if you can work a little harder and go deeper, then go deeper and fix it, and just do it. Just get in there. Don't let yourself off easy, you know? And so the flip side of that is, if you can't fix it, just leave it alone. I mean, I tend to do that too, admittedly. If I've got a line in a poem that is troublesome, but it's not awful, I might walk away from it for a while and then come back to it when I'm in a better frame of mind. So there's a balance between, not giving in, but also really trying to, work this magic in a poem, and maybe stepping away, letting some time work its magic, right? Okay. I'm gonna a quick stop here, and then I'll talk a little bit about manuscripts. And I don't know, like, maybe I should wait and do a writing prompt, give everybody a break, and then come back and talk a little bit about manuscripts. I don't know if there's a preference, but if there is, let me know. So I'm just looking at comments. Let me know if you have any questions. Hmm, we're talking. I see word cloud generators. Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay. Can I read my favorite poem from Glitter Road? Remind me later, and I will do that. I'll read one. All right. So let's write like a prompt. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm big on mirror poems or palindrome poems. And so these are poems that flip halfway through. So I like these poems because I like them for scraps of poems that don't work. Like, maybe you've written this long poem, but it's really the 5 or 6 lines in the poem that's your favorite part of the poem. Or maybe this has happened to me. I've got a poem that doesn't go anywhere, and it's all description, but there's no leap, there's no move. And so I might take those lines and use them specifically for, you know, a a mirror poem or a palindrome poem. But it's also good to see, if you write the poem backwards, does that poem, which version is better? Does it hold up? So I will, let's see, give me a second here. All right, so I have a handout to give out, but I'm going to hold off and I will just cut and paste. I'm going to cut and paste the prompt in the chat and I will read it as well. And I'll give you a little extra time to write. So if you wanted to stretch and take a break, that's fine. This is a little wordy, so bear with me. It's really wordy. Oops. So this is from the book, The Eloquent Poem, which I don't know if I have near me. Oh yeah, I do. This was edited by Elise Passion with Persia Press, I believe. And this is a book of forms, but not typical forms. So I actually highly recommend this book, The Eloquent Poem. So from the eloquent poem, so many poems have echoes and recollections in them, whether sonic or visual. When you look at these poems, you often see symmetry at some level. Mirror poems take reflections and recurrence and create something primordial, deeply intrinsic to the poem and its occasion. What happens in the mirror poem when you reflect something back on itself? When you don't when you don't say something twice, but you create reflections and distortions similar to what you perceive in the mirror. Some mirroring poems have a perfect palindromic structure. Many mirror poems, though, create a fractured, distorted, or figurative image when things get reflected back on themselves. There is a relationship between interiority and reflection, and ironically, what is mirrored and reflected outwardly may often lead to a kind of inwardness. And so the prompt is to write a mirror poem or a palindrome poem from the scraps or remnants of a failed poem. Yep, I'll give you an example. Or you can try a completely new draft. So if you're not feeling like, maybe you don't want to look through, maybe a revision won't work for this for you. But if you wanted to write a totally new poem, that's fine. Or if you got something that you're on the fence about, this is sort of a good exercise. And so I will. So I'm going to put 3 up and I will read them. And so the first one I'm going to do is a Tracy K. Smith one, and this one was in the Poem a Day series recently. So let's see. Okay. So this is Everybody's Autobiography by Tracy K. Smith. I find myself most alone when I believe I am striving for glory. These times cool and sharp, a monument of moon white stone, lodged in place near my heart. In a dream, my children glisten inside raindrops or teardrops, like strangers, like seeds of children. I will only be allowed to claim them if I consent to love everyone's children. If I consent to love everyone's children, only then will I be allowed to claim them. My strangers, my seeds of children, glistening inside raindrops or teardrops in my dream. Children lodged in place near my heart, a monument of moon white stone, cool and sharp. I believe I am striving for glory when I find myself most alone. And so she's got an interesting title, a really good first line. And when somebody says a line like, I find myself most alone when I believe I am striving for glory, my first instinct is always, okay, prove it. And so the poem's job is to live up to what they've, set the expectation to be. But in this particular poem, she goes through the first half, and it would probably be an okay poem if she just put it out there. But at some point it flips. Let's see. Here we go. I will only be allowed to claim them if I consent to love everyone's children, right? Now, if it were my poem, I'd probably have a distinct break so that you would know, like a symbol or something in between. But it's kind of interesting that this one doesn't have one, and so you don't see it coming, which is cool. So it repeats: if I consent to love everyone's children, only then will I be allowed to claim them. And so, what I find interesting is how the poem shifts, how you have to make that second half work by making small, subtle changes. So punctuation changes, maybe, the way the lines uh, flow change, punctuation inside the line. What becomes a sentence may become a question, although I don't see that happening here. Mm, Okay, so that's one. I've got two more examples. Okay, so here is the second one. This one is Myth by Natasha Trethewey. Myth. I was asleep while you were dying. It's as if you slipped through some rift, a hollow I make between my slumber and my waking, the herbis I keep you in, still trying not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow, but in dreams you live. So I try taking you back into morning. Sleep heavy, turning, my eyes open, I find you do not follow. Again and again, this constant forsaking. Again and again, this constant forsaking. My eyes open, I find you do not follow. You back into morning, sleep heavy, turning. But in dreams you live. So I try taking, not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow. The Airbus I keep you in, still, trying. I make I make between my slumber and my waking. It's as if you've slipped through some rift, a hollow. I was asleep while you were dying. So again, I thought this one had a break, but this one used to be available on the Poetry Foundation's website, and now it is not. And so I had to go to PBS's website. And I'm wondering as I look at this, she says hollow here and hallow below, and I'm not sure if it's like that in the book, so I'm going to have to check that. But you get the general idea with the shifts. And my favorite shift, I think, in this poem is the Airbus I keep you in, still trying not to let go. In the first half, in the second half, the Airbus I keep you in, still trying. Mm, I make between my slumber and my waking. So, she had to make some changes in between, but I kind of like how she did this still trying. Okay. So I'm hopeful. I'll do one more. Can you hear how the poems flip um and they change in that second half? I hope so. And I hope you can't see my screen, but you may be able to. So here we are. Okay. Yeah, let me stop. Whoops, let me stop and go back to the right screen share. Okay. Okay. And this one's mine, where I do use a symbol in the second. Okay. This is in Glitter Road. In the blue hour. I look for the supermoon obscured by clouds, listen to tree frogs called peepers in New England, their rhythmic chirp signaling the start of spring. Tell me again about the absence of an hour, and I'll tell you what it means to be present. I tuck a strand of black hair behind one ear, lean in, listen to another language, murmur of evening rising. Simple. Okay. Evening rises with a murmur. I lean in, listen to another language, one strand of black hair tucked behind my ear. Tell me what it means to be present, and I'll tell you about the absence of an hour. Rhythmic chirping signals the start of spring. Peepers from New England, or are they tree frogs? The supermoon is obscured by clouds. Look for it. Okay. And so I like the symbol. I tend to write mine with like, something to show the break. Um, I have a few more examples, but I don't want to weigh everybody down. I don't know. I may do one more quickly because they're just so good. I think they're daring too. Okay. One more. Okay. I'm going to mispronounce her name, but Backwards by Warshon Shire. The poem can start with him walking backwards into a room. He takes off his jacket and sits down for the rest of his life. That's how we bring Dad back. I can make the blood run back up my nose, ants rushing into a hole. We grow into smaller bodies. My breasts disappear, your cheeks soften, teeth sink back into gums. I can make us loved, just say the word. Give them stumps for hands, give them stumps for hands if even once they touched us without consent. I can write the poem and make it disappear. Stepdad spits liquor back into glass. Mom's body rolls back up the stairs. The bone pops back into place. Maybe she keeps the baby. Maybe we're okay, kid. I'll rewrite this whole life, and this time there there'll be so much love you won't be able to see beyond it. You won't be able to see beyond it. I'll rewrite this whole life, and this time there'll be so much love. Maybe we're okay, kid. Maybe she keeps the baby. Mum's body rolls back up the stairs. The bone pops back into place. Stepdad spits liquor back into glass. I can write the poem and make it disappear. Give them stumps for hands if even once they touched us without consent. I can make us loved. Just say the word. Your cheeks soften, teeth sink back into gums. We grow into smaller bodies. My breasts disappear. I can make the blood run back up my nose, ants rushing into a hole. That's how we bring Dad back. He takes off his jacket and sits down for the rest of his life. The poem can start with him walking backwards into a room. So this is just one of those muscular poems where I think it's really doing something, right? If we could bring somebody back, right? And a poem can do that. And this type of poem can do it. I mean, you have a good poem if it's one half, but you gain so much by flipping it and seeing how you can stretch it and make it go farther and go deeper, right? And it sort of highlights the things that happens in the first half. So I like that poem as an exercise, just for let's write a different type of poem. But I also really like it for revision, and I feel like it works really well for a scrap of a poem. So, yeah, all those writers are wonderful. So, all right. So, is that clear? That you're going to write a poem in reverse, basically a palindrome poem. Okay. All right. It is 37 after the hour where I am. And so, Kelly, what do you think? 15 minutes, 20 minutes? I can bring us back at the top of the hour if that makes sense.
Sounds good.
Okay. So we'll come back at the top of the hour. So for me, that's 8 o'clock, and I guess for you, that's 5 o'clock. That makes sense. Okay. So I'm gonna pop off. I'll probably be back on 5 minutes before um, we all come back. So if you have any questions, I can answer them in the chat. I'm happy to do it. But I'm gonna step away for a few minutes anyway. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay, this is your 2-minute warning. Okay. I didn't realize how much I was talking, but here we are. Okay. So I'm curious, maybe I'd love to hear from maybe one or two people about the process. I'm seeing some comments in the chat, so that's great. I hope it worked for everybody. I think it's a fun one, and sometimes some of you are editors, so I wonder about receiving poems that just are different, look different, and I think palindromes or mirror poems, we don't get a lot of them, so I think they stand out. So anyway, let's see. I like how it is making me revise the original and how the poem has taken some new turns. Yeah, I mean, I think the best part about exercises like that is that they illuminate something that you may have missed the first time. And just sort of as an exercise, it's just, it's fun to stretch yourselves a little bit. So, yeah, it feels intimidating, but no, it's easy. And like now that you know how to do it, you might do it with just about everything. So that's great. Okay. Any specific questions or comments about the revision process in general? Because I thought I would just spend a little time talking about manuscripts, very generally using my own experience, and then I'll open it up to you all for questions. And I have my time right. We end at 8:30, which is 5:30 your time. Okay, because I keep looking at it and I'm just doing the math. Okay. Okay. So Lisa says, I took a bad poem and began to see where the potential lies. The examples will help. Okay, great. Okay. Cynthia says, I definitely think this is strengthening a choppy poem. Yeah, it's all just one more step in the process. So thank you for the kind words. All right. So since we have a little less than a half an hour, let me see if I can get back to the right spot in my presentation. So this is just a very general slide. And then the last one is my closing slide, which I may or may not do. But okay. Okay, so you have been working on these individual poems. You have enough for a chapbook. You have enough for a full-length manuscript. Um, you know, I honestly think, in a way, this is the best time to be publishing manuscripts. Um, I think publishing them, while the process is difficult, I think overall it's not awful. There are more people, there are more publishers out there, more two Sylvias and similar presses out there, community groups and local projects and grant funded initiatives, the more of those than ever. And print on demand has made things a little bit easier as well. I think getting attention for your work is the hard part, but I think if you are persistent, I really think in a country that has more than 300 million people that we can all find our readers. So have faith that your work will make it, will rise to the top. Um, so when I put this together, I did it quickly and in thinking about my own work with the manuscript. I mean, I have done 4 books with the same publisher, which is a rarity. And when I did worked on Rewilding, which came out in 2018, and Glitter Road, which just came out, both of those, I got a no from my publisher when I sent them in again. I got this great manuscript. I think it's perfect. And they're like, well, it's not. And it's hard news to hear, but I am thankful both times because I wouldn't have had the books that I have now if they hadn't pushed back a little and said, well, it's not quite ready. And so this is a compilation of just general advice, but I want you to know that I've been in the struggle also. So I'm not just saying this from my lofty perch. I have been there in the dark days. I have sent them out and taken feedback, and I generally take most everyone's feedback, um, unless I'm sort of, you know, sticking to my position here and there. So when you revise your manuscript, I mean, maybe think about the process that we just went through for the individual poems, and it's hard to clear the headspace. You're constantly fighting that voice in you saying, "Is this any good? Is this any good? I think it's good. Is this any good?" I'm looking at individual poems. The poems are good. Is it good as a whole? And that's what we're talking about now. So let's say that you have shuffled your poems, you've organized them in the best way that you think is possible. Some just general things I would tell you is that you want to, and I can say this part because not only have I put together manuscripts, but recently I've judged a few big contests. So, in looking at the scope of what makes the best poetry, again, air quotes, best poetry in the country for a period of 2 or 3 years, I have a pretty good idea of at least what's being produced. Um, you want your manuscripts to start and finish with your A-list poems, your strong poems. Now, they don't have to be shocking, and they don't have to be, they don't have to be completely emotional, or they don't have to be the greatest poems in the world, but they should be memorable, and they should speak to what is to come in your collection. So your starting poems should be substantial. When you think about how we read poems, so if you're going to a bookstore and you're picking up a book for the first time and you're not sure if you want to get it, you thumb through and you look, and you look at the first poems. You know, you also want to close with a strong poem. I mean, something that sort of signifies that this is the culmination of all the work. Um, and so, again, think about how people read books and how you might just thumb through, and you're making all sorts of choices. Just based on how a poem looks. I had discovered that we tend to judge poems, the ones that we decide that we're going to read in the spur of the moment, right? It's one thing to read them from beginning to a book from beginning to end, but sometimes we thumb through and looked based on how long the poem is, the shape of the poem. There's no way of telling how to read a poem, or you know, I do know that's true of prose poetry. I think people tend to read a prose poem in a book if it's not too long, just because it's shaped differently than everything else. So that's my theory. So start with a strong poem, end with a strong poem, and then take out the weak poems, which is my second point. You want your strongest poems in. For a long time, I still believe this, that if you're going to have a poem that you're not 100% comfortable with, then it should lead to some other strong poem. It should make up, it should bridge between maybe 2 points that you're making between poems. But you really do want your best work in your books. And there's nothing wrong with a leaner collection. I mean, it doesn't matter that your poems may have been published and they got, accolades and people love them. If they don't work in the collection, they don't work in the collection. So don't be too precious about your work. Be willing to, try to accommodate it. But if it's holding you back, take those poems out and see if the collections work. I mean, sometimes you just have competing themes. So I would take out your weak ones. I would take out, just because you have 70 poems doesn't mean a collection with 70 poems is what a publisher wants to see. And I don't know if it's truly representative of your best work. And you want your best work. So if that's 45 poems, then it's 45 poems. Um, the trend lately, and this was true with my book, is to try to work themes in together so that they're not completely in separate sections. So don't be afraid to braid your work. And so you may want to, if you've got 4 or 5 themes, rather than keeping, section one, section two, section three, you may try to see if they all work together in some other format and see if they create a new narrative that you hadn't thought about before. So don't be afraid to mix these poems that you've kept separate forever. And you may lose a few and you may decide that there are some that you want to add. Let your poems live with each other. And so once you've got an order that you're comfortable with, but maybe not 100% happy, put the poems away. But I'm talking about printing them out. And so you have a physical manuscript. But put them together and see what happens. See if you look at them in a different light. Um, and by living together, that also means taking them out every once in a while and laying them down on a table or the floor, pinning them to the wall, and looking at them. And as you look at them, are you noticing these patterns that I talked about in the individual poems? Do you see themes emerging? What are you noticing about the spacing of these poems? Do you have a lot of sonnets? Do they all look the same? Are you comfortable with that? Um, are some of your poems, one stanza, lengthy poems that are tied together? Visually, how do they look? They may be doing something with a theme, but the other part of that, I'm thinking of the person standing in the store, oh, okay, okay, okay. So, I wouldn't make that the driver of how you arrange your poems, but if you're noticing patterns or themes, maybe you have a cluster of blocky poems next to each other. Maybe you change the format. Maybe you've got poems with similar titles that are working against each other. These are the things you notice when you let your poems exist in the same space. And so I'm paraphrasing what I think is that Robert Frost quote. Um, it's attributed to him that, if you've got 24 poems in a collection, the book is the 25th. And so you want to make sure the book is as cohesive as those individual poems are when they stand by themselves. So not only do the poems have to work, but the entire collection has to work. And, that's a lot of varying factors with the themes, with the flow. Is there an arc? I'm a big fan of just simple collections, but that is not exactly what publishers are looking for because they want to have that hook to sell the book. And I understand that. I get that. So, it's not only these wonderful independent individual poems that you have worked long and hard on, it is the shape of the collection as a whole. Okay. So I have one more closing slide, but I might save it or not do it. But um, I want to make sure I leave enough time for questions or comments, or, if you all have particular ideas about how to put together a manuscript, or if you want to go back to the earlier conversation about revision, um, I'm happy to do that. Let's see. And especially if you all are publishers or editors and you notice trends, because I'm always interested in trends and what's going on. And we've got such a lovely group with a vast knowledge base. So So I'm just scrolling right now. What about, there's a question about self-publishing. I think self-publishing is better than it has been. I don't have any experience with self-publishing, but there are now contests for self-published books, and there wasn't that 5 years ago. Um, Distribution is always the question when it comes to self-publishing. So you can produce a book, and I think for some people that's great. My good friend Colleen Michaels has had some health illnesses, and she didn't want to wait and do the whole process of submitting and getting rejected. So she did it on her own, and she was really all about the party that comes with uh, publishing a book. And so that was her goal. And so as long as you're clear about what you want and you've explored sort of your options, I think self-publishing could work for some people. It's not everybody has to go through the gauntlet of, trying to get their work seen and find the right publisher. If you do it yourself, you control everything. But the flip side is you control everything. So, there's that. Let's see. Hmm. Let's see. Kevin Carey has published all four of my books. Um, let's see. Two-word titles are back. All of my titles I think have been interesting. My first book was Underlife, and the second book was Misery Islands, which are two islands off the coast of Salem and Beverly. Rewilding is an ecological term, and Glitter Road was just came to me. It worked in the poem, and it came to me as a title. So titles matter. You know, Having the right title for your book. I think it has to be memorable. Um, I don't think it should be a cluster in that. I don't think people have to like wonder or try to recall the name of the book. If they can recall it quickly, I think that's to your benefit. It's on the tips of everybody's tongue. And I read somewhere in a marketing newsletter that for a book to do well, it needs to be mentioned, to the potential buyer maybe 3 times in a short span of time. So if it's like the book that everybody's talking about and they hear about it over and over in their circles, they're more likely to buy it. Let's see. Do poets write poems? So Alicia asked, do poets write poems for a collection or chapbook with a subject in mind, or do they collect and somehow they fall together? How do you decide that they go or not go? I am not one to write a project book, and I just had this like conversation over text with Oliver De La Paz, and he is a project guy. So he'll imagine it and conceptualize it and then write towards it. And so his book, the Diaspora Sonnets, are sonnets, and so that was his convention. That's what he worked towards. I write for quantity sometimes versus quality. So I will do a writing challenge for myself where I'll write, 30, or well, a poem a day. So like in April, I'll write a poem a day, possibly this April, I don't know. But I've done that in the past. And so I'll have, a bunch of drafts and I'll keep half of them and then I'll work to try to, make the rest of them into something. So, and when you do it that way, you don't really have a clear goal in mind. You just put them together and hope they work. But over time, you might see a theme emerge, you know. And so my Glitter Road was not it really, I don't consider it a project book, but it does have a series of poems about Emmett Till, which sort of anchor the collection. So let's see. Um, there are a lot of questions, and I think I'm missing out on a lot, and I can't read them all. I'm going to encourage everyone, though, to take a look at the chat. Um, let's see, I'll pull out one or two more. Let's see. So Carol asks, I love your question at the beginning. What am I risking in this poem? Any other questions I could ask myself or tips to help myself go deeper into the work? Often I get antsy when I am working and I can feel myself approaching a threshold of something, that I need to break through. And the trick for me is to stay seated and not get up and not think, oh, I've got to cook dinner or I've got to do something else. It's to stay with it and say, okay, I mean, actually say to myself, okay, don't get up. You can do this. And then to sit with it for a while and go farther. And I usually benefit from that. I mean, I can't think of a time where I didn't do that and didn't get something. I didn't make progress. So if you can, and it's again, it's a physical feeling. It's like, I'm getting antsy. Something's going to happen. Do I stick with it or do I bail? And I try to stick with it. So it's not exactly a question. I guess that's more of a tip. But maybe others have tips about the questions that they can ask themselves. I look for, sometimes the poems I write tend to start with description. Um, and I have to make sure they move or shift or go somewhere. So, complication we were talking about earlier is important for me. So a poem can sort of stay on this one level, but to get interesting, here's a question for you. Um, you want to seek out the things that you want to learn more about. So you might ask yourself, what do I need to know about this moment? What am I looking for? What do I need? You're really interrogating yourself with those questions. And so the poem needs to be interesting for you. And I mean, we've all written poems where we've gotten to the end and it's been like, so what? So you want to seek out those things that you don't know, I believe. And research is good for that, and reading and getting a little more information. So research is a good tool also. What don't you know? Well, look it up. Let's see. Okay. All right. I'm trying to read quickly. Kelly, if there's a question that I'm missing, just blurt it out or comment.
Yeah, I'm checking if you missed any. There's a
Yeah,
lot.
there is a lot. Okay. Well, I'll just go on. If one comes, let me know. Shoot, my slideshow. I've exited my slideshow. So I'll just put up the one slide and just round out the conversation. I like this quote by Lucille Clifton. It's just a simple slide. Poetry is informed by intellect and intuition. It's the balance of those two things, by the great Lucille Clifton. And boy, would she know. I do think a lot of the poetry that I write is about some kind of a balance. I mean, whether I've talked about absence and presence, it's the internal and external worlds. And so this is the head and the heart. So I'm going to end, I think, with just a few quick things. Um, so I just want to share also that, if the words aren't coming, if revision isn't clicking for you, that's okay. I mean, we go through periods where nothing comes, and it is okay not to write. So give yourself permission not to write, not to revise. Go fill the well, as we like to say. I remember being in a talk with Nick Flynn and Richard Hoffman, and somebody asked Nick, what do you do what happens when you don't write or writer's block? And he says, I don't worry about it, because I'm living. And I think that is so important. So, don't panic. I mean, this is what we do. So, what it means to come back to it. It's a muscle that we get to work over and over again. Coupled with that, I would say lower your expectations. There was at one point I was doing these, it was during the pandemic. And so we didn't really go out that much. And so I was looking at the bird feeder and writing a lot of poems about birds. You can only do that so much. Um, but when I was doing my 30-day challenge, I would I would go and I would, just remember that like getting a few lines is equally as important as, anything else I do. So just do the work and don't, that idea of letting yourself off easy. I mean, it's one thing when when you take it easy on yourself, and there's another thing when you just excuse yourself, and you don't want to do that. So, it's okay to sit down and not, get the greatest poem in the world. But you do want to try to make the time to sit down and do the work, right? Um, I often think it takes 10 minutes to get into a groove or to approach flow. So if you can stay seated, butt in chair long enough, I think you can probably get more done than you think. And again, if you are not too particular about how you work or where you work, I mean, I used to be the type that said, I got to sit at my desk, I need my tea, it's got to be, 8 o'clock. I don't do that anymore. I write when I can. I kind of taught myself over the years to just get something down. My kids are older now, but when you have little kids, you're just, a moment to have your own thoughts is important. Um, think of flow as practice. And so if you can get yourself to a state of, writing, it's just a muscle. It's true of revision. I mean, you sit down, usually revision is a trigger for writing other things. So if you want to write and you're stuck, revise, do them in tandem. You don't have to wait for that one day to do it. Um, I think revision can be your friend. Um, I would encourage you not to edit yourself before you begin the process. So sit down and come prepared, but don't talk yourself out of doing anything. That feels like you editing yourself. As you all know, read lots of poetry, read widely, and read people you're not accustomed to reading because, they show you what's possible. So you may not write like, name a poet. You may not write like that person, but they can show you what's possible. And it is okay also to write about topics more than once. So if you are writing about, the breakup of a marriage, your perspective changes over time. And so writing at the breakup is different than writing 2 years after the breakup, 5 years after the breakup, 10 years after the breakup. So all of these topics are worth re examining. Okay. All right. That might be it for me. I will so end on a favorite poem. So it's funny, we were just talking, I was texting with my lady friends. It's my text group. So in all honesty, that's Jennifer Martelli, Cindy Veach, and Jennifer Jean. And Jennifer was asking about the poem that we wrote during one of our poem a day poems, and we all came across the same article because we were all trying to write, a poem a day. And so that article was about a woman who was swallowed by a snake in Thailand. It was a weird article, but you know, it was the one that caught our attention. And so I'm going to read "Woman Swallowed by a Snake in Her Cornfield" if I can find it. Okay. Woman swallowed by Woman swallowed by a python in her cornfield. And I will say this is an American sonnet because we were reading Diane Seuss and Terrence Hayes, and this is a poem with a lot of complications in it, which I love. Inside every woman is a snake. Some think I'm a hoax or an oddity, rarer than winning Powerball or being struck by lightning. Everything has a form, even doubt. Think of me as someone you've met in a dream. Green stalks shade the sun, keep me hidden from the villagers, the non believers. To find me, you must enter me. Oh, that your body fits into my body makes us unholy. Let me press my mouth to your scar, run my tongue along your flesh so I can taste how you wound. The wild boars patrolling the edges won't save you. Footprints, flashlight, machete, slippers, all that I've left behind. Inside every snake is a woman. That's the part of me I love the most. Restrict, restrict, I'm tired. Reticulated constrictor, word made flesh, time unfolding, lore and legend. I am done telling the kinder story. I am a myth of my own making. Part my snake flesh, and you will find me intact, clothed as I was when I visited the corn. Think of me as the gift you're unsure how to open. Thank you. Apologies for that reading. I am tired. Whew.
Oh, I know it's late where you are. We thank you so much for being here. And I realized I was so excited to introduce you. I didn't introduce Annette Spalding Convey, who's behind the scenes, co-founder of Two Sylvias, and I'm Kelly Russell Agadon. Didn't introduce myself either because I was so excited about
Oh,
Dan's book. So congratulations for getting this beauty out into the world. And
thank
this
you.
was such a rich talk. Um, and if anyone wants to know how to save the comments, I will do that after we stop recording.
All right.
And if we all want to unmute and give Jan an applause, I will do that too.
All right. Well, before you all take off, thank you. Let me see.
I'll be your Sylvia Plath. I'll be your Sylvia Plath. And I'll find a reason to lay here all season. Let the cigarette gardens grow. And yes, I'll take you to France. We'll get fucked up on gin and we'll dance.